the Chicago Blackhawks have been really busy in the draft over the last few years, and I really want to see this team start putting something together with all of these young players that they've drafted, and I really want to see this team take a step in the right direction this season because they have a lot of players that I do really like that I think will play serious NHL roles and be really meaningful players for this team moving forward. And I think we can start with a few names in the core category for the Chicago Blackhawks here. Leading the way is Frank Nazar to me. I adore him. He's just such a well-rounded player that brings so much to the table that I like. There isn't a whole lot in his game that I think is super high end, but I think he's a really good example of a really smart, capable player that can do a whole lot of things really effectively. I think he's in this tier because he really will be a player that complements some of these top-end players. He did play a little bit here and there with Connor Bedard from what I remember and looked pretty solid as an offsetting player for him. And we'll see how things go with him this season. It's going to be a big year for him. I imagine he'll play the full season. I don't imagine he'll be on this list next season, so I'm excited to see what he can do. And then also in this tier, we've got Anton Frondell, who they just picked up 3rd overall. Now, he wasn't the player that I would have picked at 3rd overall, but I still think he's a really good option here. And for Chicago, it makes sense. I see where they're coming from with this. He is going to be a player that I think offsets guys like Connor Bedard, makes a guy like Bedard's life easier, a guy like Frank Nazar's life easier, Oliver Moore, his life can be made easier by a Frondell, just from the physical intensity, the finishing ability, the smarts, the overall just solid impact that he brings to the game. It's just going to be a matter of living up to the really high expectations of a top 3 pick, but I feel like Frondell is a player that you'll win with. I imagine this is a player that will play every shift really hard. It's just going to be a matter of just how many things in the lineup he does at a really high-end level in the NHL, but a good player nonetheless. And I still have Oliver Moore in here. I thought he looked really solid in the games he played for Chicago at the end of the season this year. He does need to get a little stronger. He does struggle a little bit under pressure, but I do think the speed and the skill and the playmaking ability are really high-end, and I think that this is a big upside bet. There isn't much of a floor with him really, but he does bring a good amount of energy. I would love to see him just make smarter plays a little bit more often, keep his head up a little more, make plays a little bit quicker, use your speed off the puck because he is already an exceptional forechecker and I love him to death. And I think, again, similar to Frondell, but for different reasons, a player that you win with, and I am really happy to see him in a Chicago Blackhawks uniform and hope to see more of them like that this season. Moving down to the depth category, we have some interesting players here. I really liked what Merrick Vanacker brought to the table last season for Brantford. Sacha Boisvert had a really solid freshman season with North Dakota. I thought Sam Rinzel really came close to working his way into the core category here, but he is a little bit more on the older side of the coin, and I do feel like there are some maybe defensive gaps in his game still, but at the same time, the offensive ability is really good, and in the limited time I saw of him in the NHL last season, he looked excellent, and I don't think there's a Blackhawks fan that would disagree with me on that. On this level too is Artyom Levshinov. Now personally, I was very surprised to see Artyom Levshinov called up to the NHL, and I know there are Blackhawks fans who love to tell me that he's way better than I think he is, and I'm not saying he's bad, but he is still a pretty terrifying player to watch at times. I just felt he was a player that would benefit from more time to develop and more experience and slowly ramping up his responsibility in the pipeline for this team, but he went to the NHL already and he had some really impressive moments, and especially when the puck was on his stick in the offensive zone. But I really want to stress that with defensemen especially, if they show best when the puck is on their stick in the offensive zone, it's good to see. But to me, the rest of the ice surface is where things really matter for me. And that's a time where I feel a little more skeptical about him, and I remain that way. But that said, a solid middle pair defenseman that brings a lot to the table. I imagine he'll play a lot this season, considering what Chicago's defense group looks like. A solid player, and he's a little further along than I thought he would be, but definitely an important one for Chicago. With Václav Nestrasil and Mason West in this category as well, I am being optimistic about Mason West's upside here. I think he's a huge wild card and probably should be in the maybes category here, but the upside is there. He's really tall, a really solid skater, and once in a while you see him pull some skill out of a trick bag or some finishing ability that you just love to see, and I would really love to see that developed in the future. And then Nestrasil, a nice blank slate player that I think brings some flashes of really good skill, flashes of really good finishing ability, flashes of really good checking ability, and a bit of a nasty streak from time to time in his game, but he just hasn't quite seized a style of play just yet. I do see some good potential there, and at the very least, a guy that big with that much range and that much skill, I could see being a bottom 6 NHL player at the very least, and maybe having some offensive upside to play up the lineup a little bit. Moving down to the maybes category, this might surprise some people because there are some players that were on the Chicago Blackhawks a lot last year, but to me the maybes category is more about long-term trajectory, and the Blackhawks were still one of the worst teams in the league last season, so when I have guys like Ethan Del Mastro and Nolan Allen down here, I just wasn't really blown away with their NHL video last season, and when I went down and watched some of them in the AHL here and there, I feel like they looked a little more comfortable at that level, but the NHL just seemed like a little bit too much, and this was a team that bled scoring chances quite often, so we'll see about their long-term trajectory as NHL players, but at the end of the day, this is their last season in my prospect database, and if they play a full season in the NHL, this will be sort of the year where you kind of really get to know exactly what you have with both of these players. I maybe could see them be NHL players long-term, especially from what I've seen of Del Mastro. It might just come down to if a coach likes them enough in a certain role for them to play, and I'm just not sure there's a certainty level with those players that really puts them in that group. I've really loved Ryan Green over the years. I'm very curious to see what he does now that he's left college. Roman Kantsarov is small, and I think a bit of a maybe here, and a guy with a lot of upside and a very low NHL floor, but a fun player to watch nonetheless. Martin Misiak and Julius Sumpf are interestingly very similar players, if I'm being perfectly honest. They're big, but they're pretty decently quick. They've got some skill in their game, but they are more sort of off-puck focused, forechecking forwards that I think might be able to find their way into the bottom 6 of an NHL roster, and maybe do it sooner rather than later, considering they are both over the age of 20 come this fall. AJ Spellicy is just fun. He's fast. He goes. Again, I'm just not sure about NHL level upside, but he certainly has the size and the speed to do maybe something at some point. John Mustard, I think, is a huge upside bet that I think has a really low floor too, but I've loved what I've seen of Mustard, and I thought he had a pretty solid NCAA rookie season, considering he was one of the youngest freshmen out there this year. That being said as well, there's Nick Lardis in here, and Lardis was a player that I watched here and there in the OHL. I caught him in passing, watching Brantford here and there. He was definitely a big reason why Jake O'Brien had so many assists last year. I just don't know about being him in the NHL. He scored 71 goals last year, you can't take that away from him, but the 200-foot impact really was limited with him. His defensive game and the work rate and the strength on his feet were really limited, I felt, and those are things that are only going to get more and more difficult as time goes by, but my goodness, you cannot take away the scoring ability from him. So to me, it'll be an interesting experiment, because this is the type of player that I think can struggle potentially, where they're really good at the thing that happens at the end of a chain of possession, but the rest of the picture, it's a bit of a question mark, and in the NHL, it's very difficult to get away with that without being a truly high-end offensive player, and I'm not quite sure he's there yet. Maybe, but not right now. I've also thrown goaltender Ilya Konarski in here. I liked Konarski when I went and watched him after the draft. I think he's a really intriguing pickup for them as a goaltender. It's another one of these things where a lot of people talk about the goaltenders that got drafted in the first, second, third, fourth round, but sometimes there are re-entry goaltenders or goaltenders that sort of play off the beaten path in Russia or something, and they just play a lot of minutes, they face a lot of hockey pucks and do a pretty good job saving them, and Konarski is one of those. An average workload of 36 shots a game with almost a .940 save percentage. Yes, he's a little bit further along in the age area, but I still think he's done a really good job based on what I watched after the draft this year, and we'll see where it goes. The last guy I wanted to talk about in the maybes category is Colton Dach, and this one surprised me a little bit. I did not expect very much of Colton Dach coming out of his draft class, but he is a decent example of this type of player that I think is a blind spot for me, where they're just big, simple, and effective. They skate pretty well, they play hard, they play physical, they just keep it simple, and in a structured situation in hockey at the NHL NHL level even, they can just make it work. On paper, when Colton Dach played this year, he had some really good defense-first impact, and maybe that's just going to be his bread and butter in the NHL. It's just a little bit too much of a small sample size, and relative to what I expected, I have upgraded him into this tier, but at the end of the day, yeah, he was impressive last year from what I saw, and we'll see how it goes. At the bottom in the everyone else category, there's just a lot of guys that I just don't think are NHL quality at the end of the day. I do want to point out one in this group that I have really liked, and that's Ty Henry of the Erie Otters. Last year after the draft, he was one of the few guys that I had never heard of before or watched coming out of the draft that I went and watched and was really intrigued by. Really young for last year's draft class, really tall, rangy, and really raw. And I think he took some good steps this year whenever I watched Erie. He's got a bit of a physical side to him, and there's some good skill and skating ability that I wouldn't expect a huge amount of offensive output. But if we're talking about guys like Del Mastro and Allen scratching their way and clawing their way into the NHL, maybe with more of a bigger, physical style of play, Ty Henry might be part of that conversation, but just not right now. But through it all, the Chicago Blackhawks are getting a 1C for me. I really have liked a lot of the players that they've added over the years. Now, if I were king of the world, if I were in the driver's seat, I definitely would do things a little bit differently here and there, but Chicago has been very outward about going out of their way to complement the sort of high skill, high upside players that they have drafted in the past, especially in the last couple of seasons through the draft, to give sort of more of a physical side, a more bottom six energy type player that they need in their roster as well. So I feel like it will become a very interesting thing to look back on for Chicago over the next couple of years, because I still just wonder if they have enough of that high-end offensive firepower, because that team last year really just felt like Connor Bedard trying to do everything himself still, and that's just not a recipe for success. And I'm not 100% sold that they have someone or a group of players that can really sort of help take over a game, but at the end of the day though, they have some really good players, to say the least. Frank Nazar, Artyom Levshinov, and Anton Frondel should all be really strong cases for a good NHL player in the future. Oliver Moore, personally, I love more than a lot of people. I think he does have a good role in an NHL gig in the future that is going to be very important. I think you win with guys like Oliver Moore. And beyond that, they have some guys that have gotten a cup of coffee on one of the worst teams in the league, and we'll see if they stick long term. Colton Dach comes to mind, Ethan Del Mastro, Nolan Allen. I've liked Sam Savoie over the years, but again, maybe he's just not an NHL player. AJ Spellacy, Martin Misiak, Julius Sumpf could maybe find their way into the NHL. And I think Chicago's done a really good job finding a lot of value and a lot of potential NHL talent. It'll just be a matter of, can the NHL team put these guys together and find themselves in a better position than they're in right now? Because I feel like around now is when that's supposed to start to happen. Time will tell, and I think they have the pieces to do it. We'll have to see how the next season or two goes. And with that, we're going to call it. If you liked the video, definitely like and subscribe. If you really liked it, definitely consider a subscription over at Scouching.ca, where you can get access to all kinds of fun data tools and our Discord server and plenty of other fun stuff that you're just not going to find anywhere else on the internet. So check that out at Scouching.ca. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.